With the release of the brand new Ruin DLC for Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach, it's time for me to return back to the Mega Pizzaplex and once again see how I can recreate the entire build in Minecraft, but this time in its ruined form. Now, building the Pizzaplex is something that I've already done before, as it's what I spent most of last year working on. However, Ruin takes the Pizzaplex and changes it in ways that make it impossible for me to reuse the same build I've already made. Locations that originally connected to each other are now separated by entirely new areas that couldn't have existed if the DLC used the same map as the base game. The biggest examples of this that I noticed immediately while playing through Ruin are the lobby elevators that now place the atrium on a completely different floor, as well as the hallway that used to directly connect Bonnie Ball to Vanny's hideout in Fazablast, which has now been replaced with a completely new hallway network. The more I looked into it, the more differences I found between the two maps, which then eventually made me realize that if I was going to recreate Ruin, I would need to rebuild the entire Pizzaplex from the very beginning. So once I finished playing through the game a few times, I spent a couple of days planning and preparing how I was going to be able to start this project by going through the Pizzaplex using a debug camera. This was something I did when building the original Pizzaplex, as having Security Breach open on a second monitor while building gave me a constant source of reference material to know what the Minecraft build should look like. And after I spent enough time looking around, it was then time to start working on the general outlines for the first locations I'll be working on, those being the main entrance lobby, as well as the kitchen behind the atrium and the utility tunnel under it. With these outlines, we can now see the structure's shape and height, but also where every prop and decoration is going to be set. This is something I always recommend doing before getting started on a big project like this, as it's going to save a lot of time and stress in case you mess up later on and realize that you need to restart an entire section just because something is a few blocks off. Now admittedly, I did go a bit overboard with these outlines than usual, but with how much more complex the ruined Pizzaplex is compared to the original, it was important for me to know where specific details need to go, even if I have Security Breach open while filling in these outlines. But that wraps up everything needed for the planning part of this project, meaning that the next thing to do is to get started working on the build itself. It's been quite a while since I've worked on such a big building project like this, as recently I've been more focused on the command block side of building instead of just a single megastructure. But just like with any other project, Minecraft builds like this can seem very overwhelming when you look at it all at once, so making sure to split things into smaller sections like I've done is very helpful for motivation to make sure you can get it done. Now this is the first time I'm actually building the Pizzaplex lobby with a proper outline, as originally I just started building with no real guidelines to follow, which eventually led to that part of the build having a lot of issues that I made sure to fix for this world. Things such as the stairs not being angled properly and not leaving enough room for the elevator between them, and even the lengths and shapes of some rooms needed changing. Luckily though, the Ruin lobby doesn't have everything from the base game, so it didn't take that long to fix some of those issues. Now, something I'd like to mention is the difference in block choice between the two maps, as obviously the Ruin location is run down, meaning I can't use the same types of blocks that I would have used when building the first Pizzaplex map. Instead of concrete, for example, I've started using terracotta as a replacement, as it's not as saturated as concrete, meaning the build can actually look like how it's supposed to. It's one thing to have the decorations in the place they're supposed to be, but it doesn't really matter if the build looks like it's still brand new. And this is something that's going to take time for me to get used to, as I've never built any form of abandoned or post-apocalyptic styled projects before, and I've always preferred the clean and well-kept look to things. So as I'm going through the lobby, I'm starting by filling out large areas with a single block, but then going back over it later to add in those texturing details. But with how big each block looks in the scale I have to work with, balancing the look of a build versus the amount of detail I can add becomes a bit difficult to work out. But that's why I enjoy building in a new way every time I start working on something. Building with the same blocks over and over again starts to get repetitive and eventually boring, but if you challenge yourself to go out of your comfort zone and use new blocks, you can find yourself learning new building techniques that can improve the overall look to your builds. The Pizzaplex is a perfect practice for this too, as almost every attraction has a different theme, whether it be a swamp environment like Monty Golf or mountains in the beauty salon. Every time I started working on one of these new areas, it always felt refreshing, as if I was working on a completely new project, which just made the build even more fun to work on. Even here in the lobby, there is a mix of everything, as there's large holes in the floor that lead to natural terrain, almost looking like how the sewer sections were made up in Security Breach. The sinkhole under the Roxy Raceway is another good example from my previous map for what I expect some parts of this build build to look like once we get to them. But to be honest, it's pretty exciting to be back into Security Breach again and learn the map layout of this new DLC, as my favorite part of playing the original game was getting lost for hours trying to find out where I was supposed to go to next. Of course that can be annoying for gameplay, but because the Pizzaplex was so fun to walk around, I never found myself getting bored of it. Now with Ruin being a very linear game, it does make exploration a bit different, but the way it does it by introducing to us these new areas and underground shortcuts, it makes it just as fun, and it's great to be able to walk around again not knowing everything about an area. The fact that the Pizzaplex is even bigger than we originally thought too is an even weirder feeling, as it's almost as if we never knew the full scale of the building. Now I'm not even sure if Steelwall knew the size of it either, but I'm sure they did map out everything before they started working on the DLC, and if that's the case I would love to see that completed map with everything attached together. Now as I mentioned, the DLC is impossibly connected to the base game, so there are a few problems there, but seeing the entire thing at once really sounds interesting, and it's another reason why building the Pizzaplex in Minecraft was such a satisfying process and why I'm so excited to do it again. Now a fun fact about the Minecraft Pizzaplex that I want to share is I actually started working on an entirely new set of outlines for the whole location, as I really wanted to make sure that I could get each area connected to each other properly, specifically the daycare to Monty Golf office hallway. That was something that was off about my original Pizzaplex, as I never intended to make those cut areas, which meant that if those hallways made it to Ruin, it would be very hard if not impossible for me to make the changes needed without moving entire locations apart and messing things up. Now I never finished those outlines, as I only managed to get the lobby and the daycare finished and a small part of the atrium, but now that Ruin has released and we know the layout, I'm very glad I didn't waste my time reworking the entire Pizzaplex again, as Ruin showed us that there is in fact no layout to the Pizzaplex anymore, and some of those tunnels and pipes that teleport Cassie around to the other side of the location make no sense when you think about it. The whole AR mask mechanic as well also made things complicated, and that's definitely something I'll need to figure out for the rest of the building series. Now since I brought up the mask and the topic of gameplay, I might as well go into that a bit, since my channel for the past year has been focused around recreating FNAF gameplay. So just like last year, my main focus is going to be replicating the Pizzaplex, with only the accessible areas being added. That was something about my old map that people asked about, and it's going to be the same thing this time, where only the areas that the player can go to will be an added part to this build. Once I've completed the build though, I will most likely go back and add some commands to make things working, like some doorways to different areas, as well as some particle effects to add in some atmosphere. Then depending how complicated it is, I may go back and add some slight bits of gameplay just like how I did with the first map. That included a daycare generator sequence, as well as a phaser blast capture the flag, and a small combination for mazer size. Now I'm not sure what I could do for this map just yet, but it is something I'll be considering once I finish the build. Another thing is the arcade minigames like Princess Quest. Ruin does have the remaining 9 holes for Monty's minigolf and also Chica's feeding frenzy, which was completely cut from the base game. That would be a completely new type of minigame unlike the others, which could be quite fun to try, but most likely at a smaller scale, since 20 rounds of it was a bit much in my opinion. However, all of this is just ideas for the future, as like I mentioned, right now I'm only focusing on the locations that we can go to. But speaking of those areas, the last thing I want to say is that I've already made a list of the attractions I'll be building in what order. Now it could change depending on what would be more convenient to work on next, but there is a lot I'm looking forward to, and even though I know there's going to be a lot of challenge with it, I'm really looking forward to see how this project is going to turn out. And with that, the lobby is all completed, as I decided it'd be best to get this part done first and section off the other 2 areas to work on afterward. Now just this part took about 9.5 hours to complete, but I'm already liking the way everything is turning out. Of course the in-game setting is way darker than this, but for the sake of the video I need to have a night vision effect on so that way we can actually see what we're doing while building. Now with that being said, I do plan on adding in some light blocks once everything else is built in, that way we can see what this place looks like with some proper lighting set up. There's a lot of really fun details that I like about the lobby compared to the other locations, as there's graffiti all over the walls of this place which doesn't really appear in the rest of the Pizzaplex. Now while it's impossible to recreate the designs from in-game, mixing between concrete and wall blocks does a good job, as it's a nice bright contrast that catches your eye as you look around. Another thing I've added are some custom player heads for plushies, which is something I always like to add to my builds just to add further detail to them. But the one thing I want to go into more detail on are the banners for the checkered pillars, as instead of them being full blocks that take up more space, using banners like this is a great way to have detail detail while also sticking to the scale you have to work with. Another way you could do this is by using map art on an item frame, which is something else I've done quite often, but I found this design to be a lot more effective in a build this big. With that being said, however, it's now time to move on to the kitchen and the utility tunnel, which while both being much smaller than the lobby, they still have a lot of detail to add in, as this is where trash piles start appearing and take up most of the room. But let's go ahead and start building and see how we can get it done. That now wraps up all the building for part 1 of this project, with a total build time of 14 hours and 7 minutes. Now I have to be honest, most of that time was me trying to place different types of blocks together, trying to figure out how to make a withered look to everything. I did mention earlier that I don't have too much experience with this type of building, but I think this all turned out well nonetheless. Working on this particular part of the building was completely different compared to working on the lobby, as instead of being a wide open area with massive walls, everything from now on is much more tight and compact, which then makes it more difficult to decide what details you can add in. Now when I started working on the kitchen, I once again started by filling it in with a single block, then adding in different types of stone to give the wall its messy look. Now I actually have quite a lot of practice with working with stone, as I've done quite a few terraforming projects in my own time by using the same blocks. But this isn't supposed to be a nice looking build, meaning I need to change my way of building a little bit to make the blocks work together for this. So even after I went over the build a second time with different blocks, I then went back over it a third time to break up the wall wall with those grey and black stains. And while I'm experienced with working on stone walls, my issue comes when building the trash piles, as now it shifts to shades of brown and yellow, which is a color scheme I haven't really worked with before. So I started to give the trash its shape by using dirt, then going over it with blocks of similar color like spruce and granite. It might seem off to use those types of blocks for this purpose, but I think it's more important to make sure that the build actually looks good instead of paying attention to what blocks you're using. Now as we start to move away from the kitchen and make our way towards the utility tunnel, there is once again another big change in what blocks to use. And while for most of it I still use a combination of terracotta and concrete powder, you can still see some more unique blocks being used, like dried kelp for the walls, which helps to complement the other green colors. Detailing a build isn't just about adding in decorations, but also making sure that the build itself is interesting to look at. It's important to do this without over detailing the build though and taking away the look of it. Lastly is the single utility tunnel, which is essentially just a long hallway with random stuff in it. This goes back to using blocks I'm familiar with, as the outside walls are mostly just diorite with a mix of calcite. The inside is also pretty simple, as it's mostly made up of the same segments like the iron bars and computer terminals. While there's nothing too important gameplay wise here, there's still a few extra rooms that you can go around before entering the sewer pipe where Monty is. And if we go ahead and take a look under there, you can still see that there's lots of detail that I made sure to add in, even if it's barely visible during the opening cutscene. And that now wraps up everything I want to do for part 1 of this build, which is quite a solid start considering how much I managed to get done in just under 2 weeks. Now there's also a lot of planning and preparing that goes into a project like this, meaning it's going to take a lot of time to complete. However, I'm really excited to get started on this, and I hope you'll also enjoy it. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, that is now going to wrap it up for today's video. I really do hope that you enjoyed it and maybe learned a few building tips as well. If you're interested in future parts of the series, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe with notifications turned on. That way you know next time I upload, while also helping the channel to continue to grow. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I will of course see you in my next video.